I've given you some guidelines for spacing the seeds. Beans and spinach about 1 inch apart. Pole beans, peas, some of those things about 2 inches apart. You can see as you turn the page there. Lettuce 4 inches apart. I don't do it that far apart, but you thin to that far apart. Cucumbers, I usually do about 6 inches apart. 12 inches, this is what you're going to thin to for your broccoli and cabbage. I plant them a lot closer than that, then I thin to that. What happens if you don't thin? You'll get plants that are small, that don't grow well, or they produce lots of green stuff, but very little vegetables. So I thin while I'm weeding, just as I'm going through, and I use those thinnings even for chicken food or food for us. So we don't waste them. You can also just put them right in the pathway. Sometimes I'll just put the weeds right in the pathway and it just becomes mulch, and then the other weeds don't come up. When you plant your seeds, you need to keep them moist until they sprout. It's called germinating. So keep them moist until they sprout. Pretty much you're going to water every day until they come up. Once they come up, then you're going to water about every other day as they continue to sprout. Once they're up 2 to 3 inches, then you're going to transition to 2 to 3 times a week. So 2 to 3 times a week, 40 minutes each time. The key is less frequent and longer, because you want to get the water deep so that the roots actually have to go down to find the water. The more frequently you water, the shallower your roots are going to be and the weaker your plants are going to be. Maintenance. So mulch is so important to make sure that you don't get a lot of weeds. So we use grass clippings, we use wood chips, you saw the leaves, we use straw, we use hay, we've used all of those things before as mulch. I do not recommend weed barrier fabric or black plastic. The reason is because things don't grow underneath it, including the things you want, which are all the good nutrients and the bugs in the soil. And we had nearly every bed in our yard was covered in weed barrier fabric when we moved in. And we've ripped out 9/10 of it. I think there's probably still some living in places we haven't gotten to. But what was the soil like underneath that when we'd rip it out?
Dry and gross.
Dead. No worms, no nothing. Like it was just dead. And you don't want dead soil. So I recommend things that are living for mulch. Hay, grass clippings, bark, whatever it might be, things that are living. But weeds, like I said, are pioneer plants. They're deep rooted. They pull material from deep in the soil, so they're not bad. They're often very nutritious. Just don't let them go to seed, or that's all you'll be growing. I weed once a week on a weekend. Make sure you've watered before you weed. It'll make it easier. And that's all I do. Okay, let's talk about organic gardening. So it was interesting. I was just talking with a woman today. I was considering doing a master's degree in organic regenerative agriculture. So I think I've decided against it as of today. Anyway, I was talking to her. Finally, she said, "Why are you taking this class?" I said, "I don't know." But she said, "Well, now that I'm speaking with you, would you like an intern?" I said, "Well, yes, absolutely. I would like an intern." She said, "Well, do you grow organically?" And I thought, interesting that you asked me that. Would you like to hear my definition of organic gardening? The classic definition of organic gardening is gardening without chemical sprays and artificial fertilizers. Okay, that's a classic definition. My definition is gardening the way nature intended, using natural resources to grow healthy, productive plants. So it's the same thing. It's just I'm more specific on what I'm using instead of what I'm not using. Does that make sense? So how do we prepare our soil? Conventional fertilizers feed the plant, while organic practices feed the soil. We will grow healthy plants and improve the soil at the same time. This I cannot reinforce more. People often ask me, "What do you use for fertilizer? How are your plants so big?" And they're shocked when I say nothing but compost. That is it. Remember, we're the forest. What does the forest fertilize with? Nothing but the stuff that falls from its leaves, from the sky, that feeds, the weeds die, the leaves fall. That's all it uses. That is what compost is. So that is what we are going to do too. So what this encourages the plants to do is to pull the nutrients from the soil. Well, it does encourage the nutrients from the soil. We already talked about the detriments of conventional agriculture, that when it feeds the plant doesn't have to reach into the soil for nutrients. We want the plants reaching into the soil and getting all of the nutrients it can from the soil. This is why we're not going to till the soil, ever, unless it's the very first year you've grown in an area. Because when you till the soil, underneath the soil, you have an entire network of what are called mycelium. They're little fungal fingers. In fact, I've learned that there is more of a tree below the ground than there is above the ground. So the networks below the ground are literally like an internet, in the ground for all the plants. So this tree says, hey, I need this plant, and this weed over here goes, I need this nutrient, I know where that nutrient is, and it sends something through its little fungal network that connects to this fungal network to the tree, that brings it up into the tree, that feeds it to the leaf, that then feeds it to the ground over here. I mean, it's just this interconnected network. So as soon as you till, you kill the entire network of living organisms underneath the soil. You give this huge fresh rush of air and oxygenation. You'll get a ton of growth that first year. But then next year, you're going to get nothing because you've killed all the soil that really, all of those networks that support it. So I never till, never ever till. The only thing I ever do on my soil is I just add 1 inch to 2 inches of compost every year. That is it. Again, like I said, if it's not simple, I'm not going to do it because I don't have time. That's it. That is all I do for soil prep. 2 inches of compost every year. So if you want to get fancy, you can do a soil test. There actually are soil tests you can find at nurseries, on Amazon, whatever you want, where it will show you any nutrient deficiencies you have. It'll also show you alkalinity or acidity in your soil. You can test and find a lot of information. So if you find that, especially if you have a smaller area and you really want to make sure that soil is doing great, because I am relying on what's in my compost. My compost is pretty broad spectrum because it's from all the food I eat. It's, from everything. But if you're buying it in a bag, you don't know necessarily where that's coming from. You don't know what nutrients are in that. So if you want to know specifically, you can do, and they're inexpensive tests. These tests, I think I bought one for $15 or something on Amazon. So you can test and see what nutrients is your soil missing, or what acidity is it at. And then you can add things like potash is an alkaline. It will alkalize your soil if your soil is too acidic. So there's bone meal that you can add. I don't, because I keep it super simple and I use just kind of a broad spectrum compost. But if you have a smaller area, which I know you do, you may need to be more specific. The way I like to explain it is it's like a person. Do you know somebody, maybe it's you, who never gets sick? Never gets sick. Just never, a cold comes along, they never get it. Whatever it might be. Why? That person is resistant, right? They're strong. And so whenever a bug comes, their immune system tackles it, no matter what. Well, plants are the same. If the plant is strong and the plant's immune system is strong, the bugs won't bother it. People never believe me when I say this, but it's true. The bugs won't bother it. Do I get bugs? Sure, but not very many, and nothing that really destroys a crop or anything else. I get almost nothing. I get earwigs in my Chinese cabbage, and I hate it. But that's about it, because I think the plants are strong enough to resist it. Yeah, I know. Everyone else will say, oh, my squash is all dead, it's gone. And I'm like, come over. I have so many. The stronger the plant is, the more resistant the plant is. If you have a new garden, you do want to till for a brand new garden. Then you're going to add compost and soak it for a couple of days before planting. If you don't need your garden this year, so all we did here, when we moved in, there were some beds along the sides, but everything else was just grass. So we covered the soil with cardboard, or we covered the grass with cardboard. Then we got as much free stuff as we could possibly find on KSL. Straw, hay, manure, whatever we could find. And we covered that cardboard with 2 feet of all that stuff. And then the next season, in spring, we planted it right into that. We didn't take the grass out. We didn't take the cardboard out, nothing. It just turned into organic matter underneath. So if you have a little while, that's how you can do it. For an established garden, you're just going to add 2 inches of compost, and that's it. That's it. It is so simple. You don't mix it in. Why do you not mix it in? Because where do you want the most nutrients for that seed to start? Where you put the seed. So I don't mix it in. Again, it's easier. So you put 2 inches of compost on the top, you just plant right into the compost. That's going to be the most nutritious place. It's going to help your seed to start. And then as the season goes on, the water will carry the nutrients down with the roots, but you never have to do the extra work of mixing it in.